I've clicked on today's video on Hurricane Beryl. As is always the case in these videos, the flood exposure are just mine, and if you're making any decisions ahead of the hurricane, look to your local weather office, local emergency management, and the National Hurricane Center for the best information local to you. So it's been another incredible day in the Atlantic with Hurricane Beryl. Last night, the system had undergone an eyewall replacement cycle in which the old eye had died out and a new eye had popped out early in the morning hours today. And once that cycle completed, which was very efficient, I should add, those cycles usually take a day, and Beryls took less than half a day, from what I can tell. And after that cycle had ended, the storm had rapidly intensified up to landfall in the Windward Islands, and unfortunately, it became a top-end Cat 4 with winds about 150 miles per hour right as it made landfall. And the pictures we've seen out of the Windward Islands today have been devastating, and I hope everyone is safe as the storm passes through. Now, the good news is the storm is now clearing out. You can see we're now getting all the clouds and bands of thunderstorms away from the Windward Islands, and this will only continue to happen tonight, and tomorrow will look like a much better day for the islands, and we'll be able to get recovery underway after the storm. Now, there will still be 96L behind it, but the good news is their development odds are not looking as good, potentially in part thanks to Beryl. So we're not likely to look at right now a tropical storm coming through. It looks like it'll stay a tropical wave as it comes through, but it still could bring some heavy rainfall, so we'll keep an eye on that for the Lesser Antilles. Now we've entered the phase, though, of Beryl where it's now in the Caribbean, and we're going to see how it deals with wind shear increasing over the next few days. Now, right now, the system is doing fairly well for itself. It seems to have continued some gradual intensification since it made landfall in the Windward Islands. This is the recon plane that we have flying in the storm right now, and they found winds on the cusp of Category 5 intensity. It's not quite there at this time. Maybe it was earlier today, but these flight level winds equate to about 155 miles per hour. So this is, as close as you can get to Category 5 without being a Category 5. Now, really, the only thing that would do if it was a Category 5 at any point would be changing a historical record from the earliest Category 5 being Beryl now to Hurricane Emily, or from Hurricane Emily back to 2005. But at this point, we're at the top end of Category 4. It really doesn't matter. And I mean, Beryl has already broken enough records. I think we can go without another one. And I hope it doesn't break this one, because that would be, not a really good sign for the rest of hurricane season, I fear. But that's for the future. That's for future discussion. Let's look at the storm as of right now. Now, right now, it does not have any signs of an eyewall replacement cycle. That's been the main question this afternoon, is when the incoming eyewall replacement cycle would take place. There's been some signs on infrared imagery and maybe some microwave imagery as well that we've had, maybe the starting signs of an eyewall replacement cycle. But as of right now, from this recon data, we don't have that. Reason being is that you can see we have these peaks here. And what you look for in this flight level data is if you have, say, a secondary peak like this, and then it peaks up, that would be a secondary wind maxima. That would indicate an eyewall replacement cycle. But as of now, we have no indication of that. So no eyewall replacement cycle right now. Now, truthfully, I don't think an eyewall replacement cycle is going to do too much. The system is going to be getting into a more sheared environment. You can see on the southern end of a trough here over the western Atlantic, we have increasing southwesterly flow over the Caribbean. And this might work in a way. We had that happen yesterday with easterly shear when Beryl was east of the Windward Islands. Now that shear kept the eyewall replacement cycle from happening for a little bit. It's possible that this increasing shear does this as well. Now, I would say an eyewall replacement cycle is also kind of bad here, because one thing that those replacement cycles do is that they increase the storm size. So Beryl was now larger than it was this time yesterday. And the issue with that is now that as it comes through the Windward Island, or not the Windward Islands, the Caribbean, it is going to be sheared, but the storm being larger is now more resilient to the impacts of that shear. And now it's also starting at a higher intensity, which has two effects. One, it has way more to go if it wants to weaken down to, say, an appreciable level before getting closer to the Greater Antilles. But also, we talked about this a few days ago, how as a storm is stronger, it's able to pump the upper high above it a little bit stronger. And this upper high is setting up a defense line, if you will, ahead of the storm that's going to work to fight off this trough. It's not going to completely negate the shear entirely, but it's going to keep it from getting ripped apart from all this southwesterly flow. As you can see, all these in the upper low cirrus clouds moving in the central Caribbean, those are going to get pushed away from the storm, and you're going to end up with still general easterly winds aloft. They're going to be weaker than the trade winds at the surface, so that's your westerly shear, but it's not nearly as bad as if you had, say, the strong trade winds and then all the southwesterly flow. That would be much more detrimental to Beryl. But this sort of speed shear type of scenario with the trade winds, it may be able to survive that a little bit better. Now, it's really just real-time watching for exactly how well Beryl does against this shear. Models are in disagreement on exactly how it's going to happen. The global models, for example, like the GFS, are more on the idea that the storm's going to weaken. While there's hurricane models like the HWRF, which, to the HWRF's credit, has done really well with Beryl so far, shows the system not really losing major hurricane intensity until it gets to the longitude of Jamaica, and both scenarios are entirely possible here. Now, there's also the implication of land interaction. We still don't know exactly where the system is going to come ashore, if it does, in either Hispaniola or Jamaica. Right now, it looks likely the system is going to go south of Hispaniola, but that's not a guarantee. Some models like the GFS still do show scenarios where it could come that far north, and we could get a little bit more significant impacts. And there's also a question about Jamaica. Does it make a landfall there? Does it stay south? That will have implications on the latter half of the forecast as well, going towards Mexico. There's a lot of questions, and we're going to be getting these answered throughout the next several days. But what we can tell you right now, especially if you're in Jamaica, you need to get your preparations done tomorrow. So this is the earliest possible arrival time of tropical storm force winds graph. I showed this when it was approaching the Windward Islands. And this is showing you when you could expect tropical storm force winds to arrive. I would expect them Tuesday night into Wednesday. So this means that you have the entire day on Tuesday to prepare. After that point, your time is pretty much up. You don't want to be working when tropical storm force winds and particularly hurricane force winds are coming through here. And you can see we have very high odds in Jamaica of tropical storm force winds, about 70%. And even 80% on the south side of the island. Now, in terms of Hispaniola, odds there are a little bit less, but we do have on the southern coast 40 to 50% odds of tropical storm force winds. And if you're making any preparations, really, you need to get them done by tomorrow morning, as tomorrow afternoon, you could be having adverse impacts coming in. Now, one thing as well I want you to pay attention to, especially for islands like Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and even Cuba, note how even though we have the center of the storm down here, we have a lot of thunderstorms going up well north of it. And this is going to cause lots of thunderstorms to come west with the storm that will be impacting these islands. And these islands are very very high in terrain, especially Hispaniola and eastern Cuba. And these storms can easily cause a lot of flooding issues into all of these islands. And that's a very real threat, even if the center of the storm never comes anywhere close to any of these islands and never makes landfall there. And you can see that rainfall potential in this map here from the National Hurricane Center, showing the potential for, potential 100 plus millimeters of rainfall in high terrain. Though it may be a little bit underdone, especially if you get, say, a trailing rain band into the high terrain in Hispaniola here. That could be a potential there, and that could lead to flooding issues in Hispaniola. Now, as it comes west, the exact north-south track is going to be dependent on exactly how much rain, say, eastern Cuba gets. As of right now, we don't really have rainfall in the forecast, but again, it could still happen, especially if it's further north here and maybe makes landfall in Jamaica. That's a potential. Now, Jamaica, you're in the threat zone for very heavy rainfall alongside the immediate impacts from the hurricane's eye wall. You could be looking at already on this forecast 150 to 200 millimeters of rainfall probably higher than that as the system comes through. And hopefully we can get the system to come south of Jamaica and spare you all from the worst of the impacts, but that's no guarantee at this point. And you can see in the latest 5-day forecast from the National Hurricane Center, I'm going to reload this real quick because we do have a hurricane warning in effect now for Jamaica. You can see on this forecast just how close the center gets here, and this is a very real threat for Jamaica. This could easily still be a major hurricane. At this point, it's 125 miles per hour. By here, it's 110 miles per hour. So high-end category 2 on that forecast. And again, hurricane warning now in effect for Jamaica. I'd imagine tonight we'll be getting some watches and warnings, or just watches in place for the Cayman Islands. And we do also have a tropical storm warning in place for the southern coast of Hispaniola. Now, into the track for the latter half of this forecast, you can see as the storm passes through or south of Jamaica, we start to get into the Western Caribbean and closer to Mexico. And this is going to be a part of the track where it's heavily dependent on exactly how much land interaction it has and how well it does in the face of shear in the Central Caribbean. There's a lot of model disagreement on exactly what's going to happen here in the Western Caribbean. Now, one thing that is known is that the trade winds and wind shear as a result will weaken, once the storm does get into the Western Caribbean. Now, exactly how strong is a storm? Is it still a hurricane? Or is it a tropical storm by the time it gets there? That could differ the amount of re-intensification we get on approach to Mexico. If the system is a tropical storm, we would likely only see the system maybe touch hurricane intensity as it makes landfall. But if it remains a hurricane, it will likely sustain its structure better throughout the Caribbean, such that it could be prepared in the Western Caribbean to intensify maybe at a quicker rate. And then we could get a significant phase of intensification in the Western Caribbean before landfall here in Mexico. Now, that's not overly likely. There's no scenario that appears here to be overly likely apart from, gradual weakening up to that point. But it's worth mentioning that possibility just given how the storm really is just not following climatology at all. And this is something very serious for you all to watch along the coast of Mexico and Belize, and even down here in Central America, in Honduras. We could still have the storm get buried down south here, even though the cone does not have you included. We've had some model guidance try and show the storm try and come a little bit further south and maybe dig itself into Honduras and Guatemala in Central America. So this is still something to watch for you all too. Now, if we look at the pattern over the next few days in the Caribbean, you can see that right now we have this nosing ridge in the Central Atlantic. This is what's helping create that low shear environment that caused Beryl to rapidly intensify. This is now being sort of cut off by a trough digging in here over the Western Atlantic, coming off the mid-Atlantic coast of the U.S. Now, this is creating a little bit of a break between two areas of high pressure. There's another one over the U.S., and this is going to be trying to pull the storm towards the north. Now, this break is not going to last long enough for the storm to take a full recurvature, like through Hispaniola, as this area of high pressure over the U.S. is strengthening as this trough is also quickly departing the scene. And as this area of high pressure builds, this is going to capture Beryl and turn it back towards the west. But again, how far north or south is it? Is it here, here, or here? If it's here, then you could get the storm tracking north of the island. If it's in the center track here, which is what the National Hurricane Center forecast shows, you could get a direct hit or just passing south of the island. And if it's further south, then maybe we have implications for track later down the line in Central America. This is going to be extremely close to watch over the next day or two as it moves through this area. Now you can see this is a GFS ensemble, and you can see the uncertainty range right there with the yellows here, showing all that potential that the GFS ensembles have. Now, towards the end of the forecast, we're pretty high confidence that the system is going to come into the Western Caribbean and come in somewhere here along the coast of either Central America or Mexico. The question now is, where does it go after? And I know there's going to be a lot of questions. Where is it going? Is it going to come out towards the coast of the United States? Is it going to go right into Mexico? It still remains very uncertain on exactly what the system is going to do. You can see the 5-day forecast is just out here into the Bay of Campeche. Now, if the system does come in a little bit further north on its track into Mexico, Then we could be looking at a scenario where the system would more likely come a little bit further north, maybe into northeastern Mexico and the southern coast of Texas. As you can see, we have a little bit of a trough digging in here over the central United States, though there's been some variability on exactly how strong that trough is and how resilient this ridge over the southeastern US will be. And these two features are vital for knowing exactly where the storm is going to track. If the ridge is a bit weaker, this trough is a bit stronger, then you can get the storm coming up further north into the Gulf of Mexico. But if this ridge is stronger and if this trough is weaker, this storm would likely stay further south and make landfall somewhere here in Mexico, like where Chris did just yesterday in the Bay of Campeche. So there's a lot of questions still on it. Stay tuned to the National Hurricane Center forecasts, especially in Mexico, Belize, and Central America, and even in northeastern Mexico and the Gulf Coast over the next several days as it tracks through the Caribbean. We've got a lot of time to watch it, so we've got time to prepare, and we'll see exactly what happens with the storm as it comes west. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.